Have you ever felt like your stress levels just keep building no matter what you do? Today I want to show you this simple analogy that's really effective and can help you to understand how stress affects you and understand the importance of managing it and how to do that. So Brené Brown has a really beautiful explanation of stress in her book Atlas of the Heart, and in her first chapter, which is dedicated to the places that we go when things are uncertain or too much, she talks about both stress and overwhelm. And this is what she says about stress. We feel stressed when we evaluate environmental demand as beyond our ability to cope successfully. This includes elements of unpredictability, uncontrollability, and feeling overloaded. And so life happens, right? And we have a certain baseline of stress that feels like it's ground zero, but in fact often there is already some water in our container, there is already some stress in our body. And it's really interesting to know that stress isn't always about our ability to get things done or to manage things. There are other types of stress as well. So some of those other types of stress are physical stress, and physical stress can be things like feeling too hot or feeling too cold. It can be toxin overload in our body coming from the food we eat or the environment or our cleaning products. Stress in our body can be viruses in our body, things that our body's trying to fight. So they put a stress on our system for a start. There's also things like structural stress. And structural stress is when we injure ourselves. And so our body knows how to deal with pathogens and injury, and it also is a stress in itself on the body. So there's those sorts of things that can be happening. There's also a spiritual type of stress, which is actually disconnection. So that can be when we feel like we don't belong. It can be when we physically feel separated. Maybe we live on the other side of the world to our family, or lockdown was a really good example of spiritual stress, like that disconnection because we couldn't have one-on-one or face-to-face relationships with people. And it could be like in the winter time when you feel really shut in and you're just not getting your nature time, if nature time is something that's important to you. So there's those type of stresses as well. And the mental emotional stresses are things like worrying about the future, not knowing what you want. Like that can be a stress. That can add some water to your container. It can be things like you've got a bill that you didn't pay on time. Now that can be a little bit of stress if it was just because you're busy and you overlooked it and you've got money in the bank and you can now go online and deal with that. Then that gets that stress out. You can pour that back out of the cup again, done and dusted, dealt with. Or if you're in the situation where you've just been rung by the power company and you don't have the money in the bank, that can be a different story. A whole lot of water going in there. And because you can't deal with it straight away, it's an open loop. You can't drain the water from there. And there are other ways that we can get stressed. For some people, running late is not a problem, doesn't really worry them at all. But if you're going to a meeting that's really important, or something that you really wanted to be there for the start of, and you get behind a tractor and it's going really slow and there's a lot of traffic and you can't pass, you might notice that there's a lot of water, a lot of stress going in your container. And this is really interesting because this is one of the ways I know that I'm stressed, is because usually if I'm not working to a time constraint and I'm travelling, getting behind a tractor doesn't really worry me. I'm happy to tuck in there until there's an opportunity for me to pass in a safe way. But when I'm already feeling under the pump and late, my behaviour is very different. So I'm very intolerant. I might even swear once or twice. And so this is one of the ways where I know that I'm stressed. Another sign for me is if I startle easier. And sometimes that takes me by surprise, because sometimes I meet someone in the doorway and I jump and I go, oh, I actually thought I was quite relaxed. And that's sometimes where you can become aware that you're stressed when you didn't have any ideas. And sometimes it happens because the stress is going in just a drip at a time rather than a whole bucket full. And so we don't notice that so much. And there are so many other ways that we can feel stressed when we're worried about the welfare of people that we love. Maybe we've got something going on with our bodies and we kind of would like to think that it's nothing serious, but there's this little thought in the back of our minds that maybe it could be something a little more sinister, and that can add stress to our lives. Another thing that can add stress is conversations, our relationships. It can be things that we said that we can't now unsay, worrying about the effect that has on the relationships. It can be things that we haven't said, that it doesn't feel safe to say. It can also be unprocessed emotions. So for those of us who have used numbing or just putting our head down and bum up and getting on with it, even though there's a lot of emotions going on. For those of us who have to show up for work and smile because we're client facing, even when we are actually feeling really low and would rather not have to do that, even when we are grieving, then that can actually add a lot of stress. Can I do this without standing up and spilling the water all over myself? That can actually add a lot of stress. And that's not something that we often identify as being a stressor. So over time, every day, these little things are happening, little things that are filling up our container. And over time, if we don't let anything out the other end, I've got a tap on here, I'll just turn that so I can show you the water coming out. You might not see the water, but the tap's on and you can see the level going down. If we're not doing anything to release this amount of stress in our body, what happens is it just keeps filling up. And it just keeps filling up. And the interesting thing about that is, in my experience, the more full my stress container is, the less capable I am of dealing with the stresses, or of even thinking about what I could do to change the situation, to change the stress that's in my body. So she just keeps filling up. And when we're getting to here, this, my dear ones, is overwhelm. And this is how overwhelm is described in Brené's book, Atlas of the Heart. If overwhelmed means an extreme level of stress, an emotional and or cognitive intensity to the point of feeling unable to function. She goes on to say, I love this definition of overwhelmed from the Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary: completely overcome or overpowered by thought or feeling. Because what happens to me here is that a whole lot of thoughts and feelings rise to the surface. A whole lot of old limiting beliefs about not being enough, about not being valuable, about being a burden to other people. And these used to be more prevalent. It didn't used to take much for me to get to that state in the old days, but I have done the work, I've practiced different ways of being and believing about myself. But when my stress levels rise, I can get myself back there. And so this becomes even more important to me. Now that I've been able to experience life in a different way and being able to relate to people and to myself in a much more loving and compassionate way, this feels more uncomfortable to me. And it's not a place I like to go. And so it's really good for me to remember that there are things that I can do to let the water level go down. So my idea with this analogy is not to tell you, okay, so to reduce your stress levels you must do this and this and this and this. It's more to inform, like, this is what happens to us when we aren't aware of how full things are getting. And when we build this awareness and when we start to go, okay, here, this is where I start to startle, but I don't even know I'm stressed about anything. This is where I can feel myself getting a bit more intolerant and getting frustrated really easily if a 5-minute job turns into a 20-minute job. This is where I start swearing. Might be a bit lower than that. But just giving yourself some sort of picture in your mind about what's happening, what's going on, where your stress levels are, because they are fluid and you have control over them. You have control over them in a couple of ways. There are situations you can avoid to stop the water from being topped up or the stress from being topped up. And there are things you can do to physically and psychologically relax. And some of the things that I've found really beneficial are meditation, and I don't do it for half an hour a day, just 10 minutes, just 5 or 10 minutes first thing in the morning I've found is really helpful. And it's really interesting. I never met the Buddha, but he was reported to have said that everyone should meditate for 30 minutes a day unless they're really busy, and then they should meditate for an hour. And this is really beautiful for this discussion, because that's what happens is when we're busy, that is when we think we don't have time for any of the relaxation techniques, and it's the time when we really need it the most. So it's really important for you to hear and understand that relaxation doesn't have to be something else on your to-do list. It doesn't have to take you an hour. I had a client a few years ago who we were talking about relaxation, and I was inviting her to write a menu of things that help her relax. And she came back to me and she said, wow, I actually have organised my list. I have things I can do under 10 minutes, things I can do under half an hour, and things that will take longer. And that was so smart, because often when we are feeling the effects of stress, we have a lot going on, and so a half-day hike is just simply not an option. It may even add to our stress, because we wouldn't enjoy it, because we'd be too busy thinking about all the things that we haven't done in the office or at home that will be waiting for us when we get there. So knowing that, there is a breathing technique called 5-5-7 breath that takes you just 2 minutes to go from a sympathetic stressed state in your body to a relaxation state. And why is that important? Because when we are stressed, our bodies have actually primed us for a life and death situation that we need to escape from. And so what it does is it focuses all our energy and oxygen on our limbs and on a part of our brain where it wants us to stay focused and just see that finish line, and then just get to where we need to be safe. This system was devised to only work for very short periods of time to get us from a space of mortal danger to safety. But with the modern lifestyle, with all these things going on in our lives, all these expectations and pressures, whether they are real or imagined, it doesn't matter, because we are feeling that, and our body is putting all the energy in the places that it thinks it needs to go for our survival, but that can't be sustained. So we get things like foggy brain, because our brain's really tired. We have no capacity for creative thought, because if our life's in danger, We don't need to think of 5 solutions. We only need one that we lock onto. We have digestive troubles because if we're in mortal danger, it doesn't matter how much nutrient we're getting from our food. We have issues with our reproductive system and our hormonal system because if our life's in mortal danger in this moment, the capacity to have children is not an issue. We just need to survive the moment. So being able to take ourselves from a stress state to a relaxation state is vital. And it's not only vital for our body physically, but it's vital for our relationships. It's vital for our emotional and mental health and for our connection, for our spiritual health as well. Because when we are swearing and intolerant and not capable of finding creative solutions in our relationships and in our lives, then that has impact there as well. So I'm curious, what do you currently use, or what would you like to experiment with as a reset button, as a way to address the stress? So please comment below. I'd love to hear your ideas, because we all have different ways of doing it, and the more we can share with each other, the more options we have to try. So here we are, stressing about stress. It's time to take a deep breath. Breathe in through your nose and out through your nose. So thank you for listening, and I'd love to hear what your ideas are. Just pop them in the comments.